Kia ora whānau, welcome back. Wellness Wednesday with me. I'm Troy from Black Dog Survivors and Support Riders, and welcome to the Black Dog Lounge. Tonight we're going to be taking a look at mental health triggers. We're going to talk about what mental health triggers are. So we're going to define triggers in as simple a way as we possibly can. And then we're going to look at developing our own mental health triggers action plan. So stick around, we'll see you very, very soon. Kia ora whānau, welcome back. So what is a mental health trigger? I guess in a nutshell, a mental health trigger is an external event or situation that leads to some form of psychological distress. And I suppose for me, somebody who lives with bipolar, somebody who is in active recovery from addiction, it's really important that I understand what my triggers are, and I have a plan that helps me deal with those triggers so that they don't lead to ongoing psychological problems for me and the people around me. So triggers can come in many forms. In fact, if you think of our senses as a starting point, we have touch, we have smell, we have taste, we have hearing, and we have vision. All of those things can spark off within us that psychological distress. If we see something that's quite distressing, it triggers within our brain a psychological reaction that almost is like reliving a past trauma. Smell, we may smell something, or somebody's wearing a perfume, and you may have examples yourself. If somebody walks past with a perfume and you go, oh, that just takes me right back to those days when I was living in Wellington and having a great time. That's a very positive trigger because it's stimulating, it's sort of going into my archives of my brain, and it's pulling out a whole lot of stuff from that really, really random filing system that I've got up there, and it's going, oh, that's where that comes from. That's that memory of times in Wellington that were blue skies and just fantastic. Now, I wouldn't be too worried about a trigger like that. However, if I was the victim of sexual abuse and somebody walked past me wearing the same cologne or the same perfume as somebody who had abused me in the past, then my brain is going to go into that rusty old attic and all that mismanaged files, and it's going to pull out and go, hey, that's that time, remember? And all of a sudden we're flooded with this psychological distress. Similarly, hearing things, and one of my biggest triggers has long been listening to the news. So I would be in the kitchen preparing dinner for my family, the news would come on, and all of a sudden something on the news just really triggered some very intense emotional feelings for me, and pretty soon I was chopping the veggies a little bit too violently. Anniversaries, so dates of things that have occurred that we found quite traumatic, can often lead to that triggering of that psychological distress we talked about. And there may be places that trigger us as well. So for me as an addict, there are definitely places that I need to avoid if I want to stay clean, or if I want to give myself any chance of staying clean. there are also people that I need to avoid as well. Certain people might trigger that psychological distress within me that will lead me down that path of wanting to pick up and use again. And I guess also in the addiction side of things, we consider the paraphernalia associated with our addictions, or the things, the tools associated with our addiction. And as I was researching this tonight's episode of Wellness Wednesday, I read an interesting story about a crack addict who used to smoke crack out of a broken light bulb, and he is literally triggered every time he sees a light bulb. So the paraphernalia associated with our drug of choice or our drink of choice can cause that psychological distress within us. So what do we do about triggers? We develop a triggers action plan. A mental health triggers action plan is one of the first steps to actually learning how, instead of reacting to that trigger, we begin to teach ourselves how to respond to that triggering situation or event in a healthy and a healing and a helpful way. And that is one of the most powerful tools that we can choose to use to keep ourselves safe, to keep ourselves psychologically safe from distress. So what is a triggers action plan, or a mental health triggers action plan? What does it kind of look like? The first part is identifying our known triggers. That is absolutely key to the success of your mental health triggers action plan. Identifying your personal triggers that cause you mental health distress. And then I like to think of it, and it's been most successful for us where I work, is to explore and understand how we react to those mental health triggers first and foremost, because quite often a reaction is almost like it's an involuntary action. We do it without thinking. And again, when I was researching this, I read an interesting story about a guy who was trying to give up smoking. And one of his things that he liked to do on his way home from work to kind of decompress from the day, as soon as he gets in his car, he lights a cigarette. So for him, his reaction to getting into the car was to want to light a cigarette. So he actually identified that was his reaction. It was his involuntary action in response to that trigger. So his new response was, for a period of time until he felt he had conquered the desire to smoke, he caught the train instead. He bussed and trained instead. And he established new pathways in his brain that were much more healthy. They were certainly much more healing for him, and they were helpful to him in the long term. So understanding how we are currently reacting to our mental health triggers, the second part of what we do. And then the third part, because we like to keep it nice and simple, the third part is taking some time and developing a new response to those potentially triggering situations. So we develop a new response to what is triggering us. And we test that response over time. Because what triggered me 10 years ago and what worked in response to those triggers 10 years ago might not be the same as what triggers me today, and my reaction to those triggers if they were to occur today. So it's really important that we measure the response and how those actions the difference that they make in our lives. So I hope that's helped. I've tried to keep this one really simple. Mental health triggers we could study and look at for hours on end. I could break down lists, hundreds of lists from thousands of different people about what their triggers are and how they deal with them. But if mental health triggers are something that cause you distress, psychological distress, the best advice that I can give you is understand what they are. Understand how you're currently reacting to those triggers, and develop a safe, a healthy, a helpful and a healing new response to those triggers. And it's perhaps the best gift that you could give yourself psychologically. So, I've been Troy. This has been Wellness Wednesday with me here at the Black Dog Lounge. I'm going to wrap things up on triggers, but when we come back, we're going to take a quick look at a stress versus mental health triggers, and you might find that some of the things that cause you stress on a day-to-day basis are also your mental health triggers. So stick around. Thanks for joining us. You take care. You stay healthy, please. Stay well, and we'll catch you next time. Kia ora whanau. Hey, just a bit of an important thing to keep in mind. After tonight's episode, I've just been editing it, and I just had a sudden thought. If you are triggered by any of the content in tonight's episode, please reach out and talk to somebody about it immediately, okay? My intention wasn't to trigger anyone, and I tried to keep the examples as safe as I possibly could, but I do understand that we are all different. We all have different levels of, we're going to have different reactions. So if you are triggered by anything in tonight's episode, please reach out. My suggestion is that you phone 0800 54 3354. That's the number to Lifeline Aotearoa. They have trained counsellors on board 24 hours a day, and they would love to hear from you and talk you through what's going on for you now. Alternatively, you can phone or text 1737, and again, they have trained counsellors available to help you talk through what's going on for you. So don't leave it, don't put it off till tomorrow. If you are triggered by any of the details of tonight's episode, or if you have been triggered by the events of this past week in Aotearoa, please reach out, talk to somebody about it. Thanks very much. Take great care of yourself and your loved ones. And from me, much love.